I wanted to show it reaction from Jamie Raskin, I was surprised he actually signed this letter, because as we've seen, he was one of the biggest Russiagate fanatics. And here he accuses liberals and progressives of revealing a colonialist reflex for calling for negotiations. Let's read. It is a bad colonial habit to suppose that ultimately peace depends upon the wishes of great powers and the great powers alone. And even progressive and liberal people can fall into this colonialist reflex. That's Jamie Raskin, representing the formerly anti-war bastion of Tacoma Park, which is it's a DC suburb increasingly overtaken by the ranks of Blumenthal. I grew up over the DC side of the border from there, and can tell you that community, it used to be like the Berkeley of DC. It used to be an anti-nuclear zone opposing Reagan. And now you just see Ukrainian flags everywhere around Tacoma Park. And Jamie Raskin is their representative. And many of you might remember when I grilled Jamie Raskin about his support for Russiagate at a hysterical anti-Russian rally back in 2017. I mean, I actually have it up here. It's pretty insane and worth watching. I want to actually say something about Jamie Raskin, because I think he really embodies the decline of the anti-war movement and progressives. And actually, we have an interview with Medea Benjamin and Tig Berry of Code Pink up at the Grayzone's YouTube channel, where Medea talks about having lobbied that day in offices like Barbara Lee, Jamal Bowman, and they all say, well, to not support Ukraine would be to support colonialism. So they've all been told to use this kind of language traditionally associated with the anti-war movement. But here's Jamie Raskin, early on as he was being groomed as a kind of neocon Democrat.
You said we don't have all the facts. So what is the most
that's why we
powerful?
need an independent commission. We need an independent commission to get all the facts. All we have is clues, So we know that Page and Manafort and Stone were on the Russian payroll. We know there are all of these meetings between the son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and Kislyak, and all these Russian agents. And, I don't know whether it was a money-making operation. I don't know whether they were actually colluding to distort the news and to frame the campaign. And that's why we need an independent commission.
In France, they hacked and trashed Macron in a bid to elect the right-wing immigrant bashing Marine Le Pen.
You said that Russia attempted to hack Macron in the French elections.
Yeah, well, we know that. I mean,
the Washington Post has reported that the French cyber intelligence agency has said that it's not true.
Well, I mean, I haven't read this article, but certainly Macron is convinced.
It's not true.
Yeah, well, certainly Macron is convinced of it. And everything that we read before was.
Well, I mean, it was reported days ago. The Associated Press.
Well, all the information I've seen is that there was a hacking and a data dump. The weekend before, there was certainly a data dump, and so are they saying
maybe it could have been anyone?
Well, it's quite
the French top cyber intelligence agency. The government got access to the servers.
You support an independent commission?
Yeah, but look at but you said that Roger Stone hosted a show on RT.
Roger Stone hosted a series on the Russia Propaganda Network.
Do you believe that we need?
Roger Stone didn't host a show on RT.
You think he's never been on an RT?
But he didn't host a show.
Okay, well look, you can go up and pick the details you want, but I don't see why it would be your interest to support an autocratic authoritarian government which is jailing journalists and fighting against freedom around the world.
I think we should tell the people the truth.
Well, we absolutely should tell the people the truth. If Macron is now saying that the Russians had nothing to do with it, I very happily stand corrected. But we know from the FBI, the CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency, that Russia was involved in trying to subvert our election. And why would you try to hide that?
You also talked about Venezuela, Philippines, and Syria.
Duterte's Philippines, Assad's Syria, the recent chaos in Venezuela. All the despots, dictators, and kleptocrats have found each other, and Vladimir Putin is the ringleader of the unfree world.
Do you support regime change in those countries?
But absolutely, from the people, democratic revolution.
Who do you think would come into power?
He's a killer. Let's talk about Duterte.
He was democratically elected.
Well, he is a killer who is assassinated.
He was elected. He has 80% approval. You support regime change?
Hitler was elected too, then you may as well say.
He wasn't elected.
There's massive.
Hitler won power through a coalition with the conservatives.
Well, but there was a democratic government. So, I mean, it was the Weimar regime was a democratic government. But
who would come into power in Syria, do you think, if Assad were and the whole government were overthrown, considering that Al-Qaeda is leading the armed opposition?
Well, I would not favor Al-Qaeda. I presume you wouldn't favor Al-Qaeda either.
I think it's very dangerous to get up and call for regime change.
To call for democracy around the world, that's what America is. We don't support democracy and human rights all over
what happened in Iraq?
Why is that dangerous?
Well, look at what happened in Iraq. It sounds like
Iraq was based on lies and propaganda by the Bush administration. It was all based on
how do you know this isn't lies and propaganda? To advance an agenda.
That's why we need an independent commission. Are you opposed to that?
All the people out here
are you? Let me just ask you a question. Do you favor an independent commission to get to the truth, or do you oppose that?
It would be fine, but I think a lot of what we'd uncover is that you have not told the truth. But you got up and stated certain things as facts that are clearly not true.
Well, that's why we need an independent commission, because all we right now is what leaks out of the Trump administration. Do you?
Yeah. So basically, after that interview, I ran into Jamie Raskin at a event in DC. We got Danny Shaw in the studio, by the way. He's going to come on and discuss Haiti and Brazil with us. But I want to say this about Jamie Raskin, just because it's kind of personal for me, having grown up in the area of Tacoma Park and knowing how it's been transformed and what he represents. And I'm going to get into that. But I went to an event in DC. It was kind of like a cocktail party of some anti-war people, progressives and libertarians, including many people formerly in the Foreign Service who were disenchanted with the direction of U.S. foreign policy, who wanted to get some support in Congress for the idea that Congress should be forced to declare war before the president acted abroad. That was their thing. And Jamie Raskin showed up. And rather than supporting or being supportive of this and talking to the host of the party about how he can advance more congressional power to restrain the executive on making war, he took aim at me. He cornered me and started screaming at me and waving his finger in my face, just like berating me for that interview and accusing me of lying and being pro-Putin. And he wouldn't let me say a single word. And he started demanding I apologize. I said, why should I apologize? You should apologize for completely betraying the tradition of Marcus Raskin. His father founded IPS and was an opponent of the Vietnam War. He founded one of the only moderately anti-war think tanks in Washington, D.C. But then there's also Tommy Raskin. Tommy Raskin was Jamie Raskin's son. And Jamie Raskin has talked a lot about his son's suicide. He was depressed and committed suicide. It's a really tragic story because he was a really smart young person. Jamie Raskin talked about it in the context of January 6th. He's written about it. He's made a big deal about it. But one thing he's never talked about is what his son actually represented. His son, I think Tommy Raskin would have been with us on this stream right now. This is who his son is. Tommy Raskin was an anti-imperialist. He was a contributor to antiwar.com. And here he is at Amherst delivering a talk on lies the war state tells us while his father was telling the war state's lies. February 7th, 2018. He did not live long after this. You just look up Tommy Raskin's writing on the United States and its empire. It's searing commentary. He knew exactly what was going on. He questioned the official story around Skripal and around Russiagate. And I had a chilling conversation with my friend Scott Horton from the Libertarian Institute because I knew he used to contribute. The Libertarian Institute hosted antiwar.com. And Scott said, he applied for an internship just a few weeks before he took his own life. And I wish I had just given him that internship. I just didn't get around to it at the time. So Jamie Raskin really shows what Washington can do to separate you from everyone around you. And the real story of Tommy Raskin being an anti-imperialist has never been told to the American public. So this stream is dedicated to him, and Jamie Raskin really should just be absolutely ashamed.
Can I say, just by way of segue, that just a few weeks ago, I mean, he mentioned in that video all the Venezuela, Syria. He did like a laundry list of like official U.S. enemy states. But he also, you know, just a few weeks ago, he threw his support behind a letter saying that the U.S. needs to back efforts to create a transitional Haitian government with what they call the Montana Accord. They say this is a Haitian-led mechanism. It's not. This is basically a way to impose a U.S. coup government. So, you know, he'll back a coup there, maybe now too, but only because the situation is so bad that they know the alternative is a like revolutionary government, you know, not U.S. backed one.
Well, that's a perfect segue for Professor Danny Shaw, who I'm going to bring in right now. And Aaron, I know you've done a lot of coverage of Haiti, so you're more than welcome to stay, because we're going to talk to Danny about Haiti as well as the Brazilian election. And Alex, you're welcome to.
Let me just say a final thing before I jump off.
Sure.
I unfortunately can't stay. Just going back to Raskin's letter, where he talks about that somehow people who are calling for diplomacy in Ukraine are practicing what he calls a bad colonial habit, where he says that supposes that ultimately peace depends on the wishes of the great powers and the great powers alone. So basically, he's accusing people who advocate diplomacy right now of falling into what he calls a quote colonialist reflex, because somehow we're trying to dictate to Ukraine how to end the war in Russia. I mean, it's a pretty shocking statement. He's appropriating anti-colonial rhetoric to justify a neo-colonial proxy war. And of course, it's based on ignoring the reality of how this war has gone on so far. And we know from accounts that have come out based on sources from basically every side, Ukraine, Russia, and the US, that there was progress toward a peace deal reached back in March and April. And the US sabotaged it when Boris Johnson went over to Zelensky and told him not to negotiate with Putin. And if he did, the US and UK would not back him up, which basically was an order to keep fighting. So this idea that, you know, it's colonialist of people to call for diplomacy now for Ukraine, and only it's up for Ukraine to decide. First of all, that's a stupid argument, just intellectually, but factually, based on how things have gone so far, it's the U.S. has done the exact opposite of what Raskin claims to try to defend, where the U.S. has dictated to Ukraine when and not it can reach a peace deal. And of course, that's the problem with this letter, and this is where I'll end. In trying to be ambiguous with their initial letter and trying to get as many signatures as possible, like to bring on people like Jamie Raskin, you have to pretend that what has happened so far just doesn't exist. So in calling for diplomacy with Russia, if possible, and making it seem as if just, you know, the problem has been a lack of effort so far, it erases the factual background, which is that there has been an effort towards diplomacy, but the U.S. has sabotaged it at every turn. And if you're not willing to acknowledge those basic facts, then you're not going to get very far, because then you're not rooted in reality. And because you're not tethered to reality, you're going to cave very quickly when you get the slightest pressure from neocons in your party and in the media. And that's what they did within 24 hours. And it's just pathetic beyond words.
Absolutely pathetic. Well, Aaron,
I'm going to hop off too, I think. But, you know, I also want to just add, this AOC said basically the same thing, that we have to support the Ukrainian right to self-determination. What these people are not talking about is the people of the Donbass's right to self-determination. The people of Eastern Ukraine have no right to determine their own future. And if you say they do, then you're a colonialist. Even if you say, I think everyone in Ukraine should have the right to decide what part of this country, whether they want to be a part of Ukraine, whether they want to be a part of Russia, that's colonialism now. Self-determination is colonialism. Like, up is down, left is right. Nazis are good and peace is evil. And like, that's the world we live in.
I mean, you know, the Donbass, you know, I don't know, because, you know, like the polls there have shown different things over the years. With Crimea, for example, though, it's just unmistakably clear, like the vast majority of the population wants to be a part of Russia. Nobody disputes that. Donbass, like, I'm sure it's a majority if I were to bet, but I do think there's probably a bit more of a diversity of views there when it comes to what they want. And there, at least the polls I've seen. But Crimea, which Ukraine is now trying to retake, and that's the official Ukrainian policy, which I guess we're not allowed to question because it's up to Ukrainians to decide. In Crimea, the vast majority all want to be a part of Russia and have tried to be a part of Russia for a long time. But it's exactly as you say, people, voices like them, their agency it doesn't count.